I'll fire you later, not now, Ron said with a smirk that could rot drywall. That smug bastard didn't even flinch when he said it, just walked past me like he was stepping over roadkill. The hallway was quiet except for the squeak of his loafers and the ticking light above the exit sign. I didn't reply. Didn't give him the satisfaction. I just stood there, staring at the back of his greasy little haircut, the smell of cedar cologne and control lingering in the air like mold. He thought he won. Thought his timing was clever. Delay the firing, keep me nervous, off balance. But you can't rattle a woman who's already lived 1,000 silent betrayals in Excel spreadsheets and forgotten birthdays. You sure as hell can't scare someone who's been waiting, watching, documenting. I walked back to my desk, not slowly, not in a daze like some fired intern, but with a steady rhythm. 4 steps per breath. Calm. Intentional. I sat down, clicked my screen awake, and opened a folder I'd labeled Q2 Vendor Cleanup. No one ever checked vendor cleanup files. That was the beauty of it. The last document was already waiting, precompiled, timestamped, watermarked, mirrored across 3 offsite drives. Contracts. Amendments. Schedules. The shell companies Ron used to siphon God knows what into anonymous accounts, buried in compliance jargon. I'd traced it all. Payments routed through fake vendors, some registered under dead-end LLCs in Delaware and the Caymans. And every single one bore his signature, right next to the clause he never thought anyone would cross-check. Schedule C, External Disbursement Pathways. That line should have been printed in neon and stapled to his forehead. I hit print. 72 pages. The printer whirred like a chainsaw trying to keep a secret. No one looked up. That's the thing about working in contracts and compliance. People forget you're there. You blend in with the desks and paper clips. But if you're reading this, listening to this, don't. We're not invisible. We're just waiting. Hey, while you're here, 97% of people hear these stories and move on without subscribing. If you're one of the few who actually gets what stories like this mean, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the team bring more hidden truths into the light. I slid the pages into a plain white envelope. No address, no logo. Just 3 words, written in pen. For executive review. Not for Ron. Not for HR. For the top. The kind of people who still get handed paper. I stood up, calmly, quietly, and walked past the rows of oblivious product managers and budget goblins who were too busy slacking about kombucha orders to notice. My security badge clipped softly against my hip like a countdown clock. At the front desk, the receptionist looked up with her usual mascara-smeared smile. I didn't speak. Just slid the envelope across the counter and nodded toward the CEO's stack. She blinked like she'd forget it by lunch. And maybe she would. But that envelope was heavier than it looked. It carried 5 years of signatures and secrets, and it wasn't addressed to a person. It was addressed to consequences. I walked out without a word. No drama. No flailing. Badge turned in. Laptop wiped clean. Let Ron laugh with his buddies at happy hour about how he finally took out the wallflower in legal. Let him smirk over whiskey while pretending he had any idea what I'd done. Monday was coming. The CEO's office was on the 14th floor. And that's where the envelope would land, right under the morning brief. It was never about revenge. It was about light. Let him try to fire me later. I had already gone nuclear. You don't set fire to a man like Ron in a day. You collect the kindling slowly, one shredded receipt and anonymous payment line at a time, until it's so dry that all it takes is one flick, one envelope, and the whole damn tower goes up. 2 years ago, I started noticing the patterns. Not all at once. Just little things. Vendor names that didn't match W-9s. Payment splits routed to LLCs I couldn't trace past a P.O. box in Dover, Delaware. A weekly retainer fee to a consulting group, whose address redirected to a frozen yogurt stand in Arizona. On paper, it was boring. The kind of bureaucratic sludge no one but me and the IRS would ever read. But if you looked closely, really looked, there was a hum under it. A frequency that didn't belong. And it was always humming under the same name, Schedule C, External Disbursement Pathways. That clause was Ron's signature move. Buried deep in the appendices, often after 10 pages of indemnity language, like a magician planting a trapdoor beneath velvet. The Schedule C writers always came in late-stage drafts. Unreviewed. Final formatting pass, he'd say. Sometimes he'd drop them into a PDF without version control, so legal wouldn't track the change. I wasn't in legal. I was in contracts. And contracts don't forget. At first, I flagged a few inconsistencies in shared notes, like a good little analyst. Got no replies. Then one morning I found my comment thread deleted entirely. No record. Like I'd never typed it. That was the moment I stopped being an employee and started being an archivist. Every contract I touched after that went into my own private mirror. Not company cloud offsite. Password protected. Encrypted. If I had to use my personal laptop at 1 a.m. to download version histories and run forensic comparisons, so be it. Ron thought he had the system gamed because he understood people wouldn't read. He was right, until he wasn't. There were nights I sat alone in the empty cube farm. The glow of the desk lamp the only proof I still existed in that place. Everyone else had gone home. Ron had probably taken a black car to a steakhouse. I had a thermos of cold gas station coffee and a sticky note that read, "Crosscheck Schedule C, Vermont Systems LLC." Vermont had shown up 5 times in Q3 contracts under different spellings. One with 2 T's. One with a trailing comma. Ron's signature was on all of them. When I brought it up, casually offhand, like maybe it was a formatting issue, he smiled that reptile smile and said, "Some things are above your pay grade." Then he patted my shoulder like I was a kid who just asked where babies come from. Above my pay grade? That was the moment I started compiling the kill file. By the end of year 1, I had mirrored over 240 contracts, 82 of which had at least one writer referencing Schedule C. Out of those, 57 routed to anonymous banking endpoints. 4 were traced to offshore accounts under different names. Names that didn't appear in our vendor directory but did appear in Ron's forwarded emails. One was signed the same week Ron put a down payment on a new vacation property in Turks and Caicos. You tell me if that's a coincidence. But I didn't go to legal. I didn't run to HR. That's what he expected. Some desperate little compliance girl crying in a conference room, begging for help. No. I stayed quiet. I bled in silence. And I kept printing. I kept saving. I kept preparing. Because Ron may have had the title, but I had the truth. Every amendment he ever slipped through. Every burner account disguised as regional processing fee. Every discrepancy I let sit, ferment, and stack, until the weight of it could crack the floorboards under his Gucci loafers. 2 years of watching him talk over me in meetings, steal my analysis, delegate blame, chuckle when I showed up early, mock my overly formal filing habits. 2 years of silence so thick I thought I'd suffocate. And now 2 years later, I had a forest of receipts, bound, ordered, and quietly left at the front desk like an offering. A paper gospel of corruption. I didn't scream. I didn't march. I simply did what Ron never saw coming. I listened. I documented. I waited. And then I let the paper do the talking. There was no speech. No farewell lunch. No cheap cake in the break room with my name misspelled in red icing. I didn't even shut down my monitor. Just locked the screen, placed my badge on the keyboard, and slid the chair back like it was any other Thursday. I'd already stripped my desk of anything personal. My mother's lucky coin, the cactus that somehow survived 5 fiscal years, a photo of my sister's dog in a Halloween costume. All gone the night before. I didn't want to give Ron the show. He wanted drama. Wanted me broken, humiliated. Sobbing as security walked me out. I gave him silence. Nothing makes a narcissist squirm more than not being seen. The hallway buzzed with end-of-quarter tension. Product managers bickering over launch timelines. Interns clicking too fast on Slack to look busy. No one noticed me. And that was perfect. I passed the front desk, envelope in hand, hard as stone in my chest. The receptionist, Erin, I think, was painting her nails some kind of aggressive neon, barely looked up. "Morning," she mumbled, like I was just dropping off another coffee reimbursement. I placed the envelope on the CEO's stack. It was sandwiched between a quarterly vendor report and an invite to some strategic synergy summit. She slid it over without glancing at it. Didn't even ask what it was. That's the thing about power at that level. It's too busy to question the quiet. The envelope sat there like any other memo. But inside was an infection. An unraveling. The walk to the elevator was the longest 15 seconds of my life. I didn't speed up. Didn't glance back. The doors opened, mirrored and sterile. I stepped in alone. The doors closed. That was it. 5 years erased in stainless steel silence. By noon, Ron was laughing in the break room with that fake haha voice he used when fishing for validation. I know because Anna from finance texted me. Ron just said you'll be forgotten by Monday. Quiet ones never make headlines, direct quote. Sure, Ron. Keep laughing. He didn't know the envelope had already been opened. Not yet. But the fuse was burning. And it was dry fast, and buried in the CEO's read before 9 a.m. stack. While Ron paraded around like a smug little Caesar, slapping backs and mocking my departure, legal was about to be handed 72 pages of vendor fraud disguised as operational noise. Half the people in that building would never see it coming. They thought I was invisible. But I wasn't invisible. I was embedded. No goodbye email. No exit interview. I gave them nothing to trace, nothing to dismiss. Just one sealed envelope labeled for executive review. No drama. No warning. And absolutely no hint of what it contained. Calm before the storm isn't calm. It's tension disguised as peace. A breath held right before the scream. A sky gone still before the first crack of thunder. That was Friday. Monday, they'd wake up inside the fire. The envelope was opened at 8:07 a.m. by Marla Gentry, Chief of Staff to the CEO. She always started her mornings early, coffee in one hand, a red pen in the other. Eyes already squinting from whatever fire awaited her inbox. She probably thought it was just another compliance memo, or an overzealous audit request from legal. But the moment she flipped past the first page, her pen dropped. No one spoke when she carried it into the executive suite. Just the sound of her heels tapping against the tile like a metronome counting down the end of a regime. She didn't knock. Just pushed the glass door open, slid the envelope across the CEO's desk, and whispered, "You need to read this. Now." Within minutes, the silence in that room turned acidic. The CEO's assistant, normally buzzing around with laminated briefing folders, froze in place when she heard, "Who signed this?" followed by a muttered, "That's his signature. Every one of them." By 8:31, the general counsel was in the room. By 8:44, the VP of Internal Audit joined, already dialing his personal line to the outside firm they kept on retainer for sensitive reviews. They spread the documents across the table like a murder scene. Every page marked with routing paths, flagged disbursement chains, and familiar names that weren't supposed to exist. There was no room for doubt. Each writer was signed, time-stamped, and connected to Ron. No aliases. No proxies. Just Ron's fat, confident signature like he'd never once imagined someone might keep a mirror. The CEO leaned back in his chair, white-knuckled. "Get his badge logs. I want to know when these were approved, and who was in the building with him." They pulled my exit record by 9:10. My final document review, the timestamp, my security clearance surrender. I hadn't wiped a thing. No edits. No tricks. Just facts. Clean and damning. What scared them most wasn't the content. It was the surgical calm behind it. No threats. No notes. Just evidence. And suddenly, Ron was nowhere to be found. His Slack profile, once obnoxiously active with fire kill in it, reactions and self-congratulatory gifs, went dark. HR paused his calendar invites. Legal requested logs of every contract he'd touched in the past 2 years. Someone from security printed a copy of his photo and stuck it next to the door reader, underlined in red. No clearance without GC sign-off. At 9:27 a.m., Ron finally got the call. Not from legal. Not from the CEO. From reality. He was in the parking garage when it hit, mid-joke with someone from sales, bragging about his new watch, some limited edition monstrosity. The call was from Marla's direct line. He looked confused at first, then grinned. Probably thought it was about damage control. Maybe even a promotion. When he answered and heard her voice, the smile cracked. "Marla. There's a file you need to see." "Ron. I'm sorry." "Marla. You need to sit down before you see it." Ron walked toward the stairwell, probably thinking this was some overblown audit panic. That's when his phone buzzed again. It was a calendar alert, automatically forwarded from the CEO's office. 10 a.m., emergency review. And that's when he made the mistake of calling me. The call came in as I sat in my kitchen, buttering toast with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I saw his name flash on the screen, Ron Office. With that dumb photo he used, the one with the sunglasses and toothy grin like he'd invented confidence. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then I declined. No voicemail. He didn't leave one. But I know what he would have said. Let's talk about this. There's no need to escalate. We can fix it. Ron always thought every fire could be negotiated down to smoke. He didn't understand that sometimes silence is the escalation. That sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is nothing at all. While he stood in that stairwell, breathing fast, the boardroom upstairs was filling with lawyers holding pages he never thought would see daylight. His name was already missing from the org chart drafts being prepared for the week's all-hands. Slack threads about Ron's update were quietly archived. By noon, there wouldn't be a single trace of him left on the active permissions log. He threatened to fire me later. Turns out, he was the one who just got erased. The calendar invite arrived at 10:17 a.m. sharp. Subject line: Private meeting urgent. Sent from the CEO's assistant, flagged high priority. Location: Executive Conference Room B. No notes. No explanation. Just my name and the timestamp. I stared at it for exactly 11 seconds, then clicked decline. Not out of spite. Not to be dramatic. Because I didn't need to be in that room. They already had everything they needed. The whole damn file. The mirrored contracts, the disbursement trail, the buried riders under Schedule C. All of it was sitting on their sleek mahogany table while someone probably whispered, "How the hell did we miss this?" They didn't miss it. They ignored it. So instead of suiting up for a grovel session, I opened a new incognito window and logged into an anonymized email service I'd set up over a year ago. I used it exactly once. Now. 1 sentence. 12 words. No sign-off. No threat. Just a surgical slice of truth. Look at who approved the Schedule C riders. I addressed it to internal audit at companyname.com, CC'd legal compliance team at companyname.com. I didn't need a response. I didn't even care if they traced it. That inbox was ghosted, rerouted, disposable. The message would hit like a grenade made of plain text. By 10:45, PR was already circling the wagons. I knew the signs. A whisper in the hallway. "Hey, don't post anything company-related today." A Slack ping from comms. "Just a heads up, the press release for the product launch might shift." Then, a company-wide calendar update labeled TBD, internal statement prep. No one said crisis. They never do. It's always something like alignment or reputation review. But I could feel the panic tightening like a belt one notch at a time. Inside the executive suite, I imagined they were flipping through every single contract Ron ever touched, highlighting signatures, panicking over timestamps that could not be unsent. And someone, maybe the GC or Marla, would mutter the words they never wanted to say out loud. If this leaks, we're looking at SEC scrutiny. Maybe worse. And all of that, the hush, the fear, the polished crisis playbook, was the result of one envelope, one call declined, and one anonymous email. The balance had shifted. I wasn't the mouse anymore. I was the ghost in the wires, the voice in the vents, the data they couldn't ignore. For 5 years I'd been passive, predictable, invisible. That's the funny thing about being underestimated. People never see the moment you decide to become a threat. They thought I'd just disappear, that the quiet girl from compliance would vanish like a failed hire, take her little badge and move on. But now I was everywhere. In the email headers, in the audit logs, in the mirrored drives they couldn't erase. And Ron, he was scrambling. I guarantee it. Sitting in a room full of suits, trying to explain why 27 vendors had matching payment endpoints. Why shell companies with no LinkedIn presence were getting monthly retainers larger than our top-tier suppliers. And why every last one of those contracts bore his name on Schedule C. He probably tried to spin it. Standard subcontractor protocol. We were optimizing vendor pathways, legacy payment structure. He was good at spinning. But not this time. Not with everything cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to show up. I didn't even need to send more than 12 words. They opened the door and found the fire already inside. The CEO's call came in at 12:41 p.m. Not through the company line, not through HR, not even from his assistant. It came from his private cell. A number I only had because of an old emergency contacts spreadsheet someone once shared without thinking. He wasn't calling to threaten. That was Ron's move. No, this was the voice of a man who'd just realized the floorboards under his C-suite were soaked in kerosene. And someone had already struck the match. I let it ring twice before I answered. "David," he said, his voice low, too even. The kind of calm that only shows up when someone is terrified. "I just want to talk. Off the record." I didn't respond. A beat passed. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money? Reinstatement? Severance? We can figure something out, quietly." I could hear someone in the background, maybe Marla, maybe legal, whispering urgent things in hushed tones. Papers rustling. A printer kicking out copies too fast. The whole building must have been vibrating under the weight of unspoken panic. I breathed in once. Then spoke. Publicity. Silence. Not confusion. Just disbelief. Like I'd said the one word no executive wants to hear in a moment like this. Publicity means accountability. It means headlines. It means an investor relations nightmare, a press conference, a bloodbath on the quarterly call. No settlement, I added. No hush money. No quiet exit. He tried to recalibrate. "David, I don't think you understand the scope." "I do," I cut in. "Better than anyone in that building. That's why I want a full public-facing audit. Internal memo goes external. You acknowledge the abuse of Schedule C contracts. You acknowledge that disbursement riders were inserted post-approval, without oversight." "That's not," he started but stopped himself. "Because it was that. And he knew it. I didn't need vindication. I didn't want a raise or a job back or some bullshit NDA payout. I wasn't interested in Ron getting fired behind closed doors and shuffled off with a golden parachute. I wanted sunlight. I wanted the rot carved out with a scalpel and held up for everyone to see. "Make it public," I said again. "Or I will." The line went so quiet I could hear him exhale. That shaky, resigned breath of a man who knows he's no longer steering the ship. He's just trying to keep it from sinking before it hits the press. "We'd need time," he said finally. "You had years." Another silence. "Then, we'll draft something." "Not draft," I said. "Confess." Because here's the truth no one in those upper floors wants to admit. Companies don't change when people scream. They change when someone slips them the receipts and says, "Now explain this to the public." I hung up before he could ask for anything else. No conditions. No deadlines. He had what he needed. The facts were already in their hands. Now they had a choice. Control the story or be swallowed by it. Somewhere, I imagined Ron pacing in a glass office, trying to call favors, pulling strings that no longer held weight. Maybe he was already boxed out. Maybe his email was locked, his badge disabled. I didn't care. He wasn't the end goal. He was just the infection. The cure was truth. Loud. Undeniable. Ink on paper, voice in mic, memo on company letterhead. No PR spin. No, we take this seriously. No isolated incident. The only line I wanted to read was this. "We failed to prevent an abuse of power. And we are not burying it." That's what justice looked like to me. Not courtrooms, not payouts. Just one clean sentence. In public. By Tuesday morning, Ron was gone. Not just fired, erased. His name was stripped from every internal system like he'd never existed. Email login, revoked. Slack profile, deactivated. Internal directory, blank. Even his executive bio on the company website redirected to a 404-page by noon. The formal announcement didn't come. They never do in cases like his. Instead, it started with a quiet memo from legal. Effective immediately, Ronald G. Redacted is no longer with the company. That was it. No thank you for his service. No pursuing other opportunities. Just a vanishing act sealed with corporate tape and silence. But what wasn't silent, what couldn't be, was the alert that hit our compliance channel that same afternoon. SEC watchlist flag issued. Subject: Ronald G. Redacted. Pre-investigation review pending. That one didn't stay internal for long. A few smart reporters must have caught wind. By Wednesday, 2 financial blogs had picked up chatter that something was off in our vendor compliance division. Speculation mostly, but enough to make the C-suite sweat through their tailored collars. Legal wasn't waiting. They started pulling every vendor contract Ron had touched, every shell entity approval tied to his digital fingerprint. It wasn't just Schedule C riders anymore. They were going deeper, back years, reviewing any payment over $10,000 issued without dual sign-off. Then came the internal email. Subject: Immediate Clause 4.8 Vendor Audit. Mandatory action. Every department head was told to pause disbursements and forward their files for review. No exceptions. No delays. Clause 4.8 was Ron's favorite loophole, used to justify third-party consulting relationships without standard oversight. Now it was radioactive. People were whispering in elevators. Some swore they'd flagged those riders before and were ignored. Others clung to plausible deniability like a flotation device. The interns just looked scared. They'd never seen a system hollow itself out in real time. I watched from afar. Not with glee. Not with some smug sense of vengeance. Just stillness. Closure doesn't come with applause. It's quieter than that. It's a spreadsheet reloading with a name missing. It's a policy revised without your title listed. It's a man who used to own the hallway now relegated to an archived badge number. And a string of audit flags no one can delete. I didn't toast. I didn't even smile. I just sat at my kitchen table, watching the company bleed its sins into compliance memos and contract rewrites. Watching the thing that fed Ron's arrogance finally fold in on itself. All I'd done was hold up the mirror. He cracked under his own reflection. The press release dropped at 6:04 p.m. on a Thursday, strategically late enough to bury it in the weekend cycle, but just early enough to pretend they weren't hiding. It was short, phrased like every other corporate deflection ever written, polished by lawyers who charge by the semicolon. We are cooperating with regulatory authorities regarding inconsistencies in historic vendor contracts. An internal review is underway. We remain committed to operational integrity and full transparency. No names. No timelines. No mention of Ron. But anyone who'd been paying attention didn't need them. By Friday morning, the headline had already made its rounds through industry blogs and mid-tier financial sites. SaaS giant flags irregular vendor activity, compliance investigation underway. Buried 4 paragraphs down was a single sentence that made my chest tighten. According to internal sources, the issue appears linked to rider clauses embedded in late-stage contract drafts, approved by a former senior executive. Former. They were keeping it clean, but the tone had shifted. The power wasn't in Ron's corner anymore. It wasn't even in the CEO's. It was in the documents, in the audit trails, in the signature logs and time-stamped PDFs no amount of PR lacquer could sand smooth. And then came the op-ed. It didn't hit Forbes. Not the Times. It was smaller, intimate. A curated piece in the Ledger, one of those quietly respected compliance journals that serious auditors actually read. No byline photo. Just 2 words at the top in small italics. Records custodian. I hadn't written it for applause. Or revenge. I wrote it because someone needed to understand what silence can do in the hands of the observant. It opened plainly. The most dangerous failure in any institution is not ignorance, it's neglect. Halfway down there it was. The quote I knew would outlive me in ways no job title ever could. Oversight is a choice. The piece didn't name the company. Didn't mention Ron. Didn't even describe the exact nature of the abuse. It didn't have to. Anyone who'd worked under that roof, anyone who'd ever pushed a contract through under pressure, anyone who had ever thought, that looks odd, but it's probably fine, they'd feel it. It wasn't just a condemnation. It was a mirror. And suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet analyst in the corner cubicle who flagged typos and filed vendors no one cared about. I was a voice. Not loud, not angry. Just certain. They didn't know it was me. Not officially. But Marla did. Legal probably did too. And that was enough. They couldn't smear me. I hadn't broken in. I hadn't hacked. I hadn't blackmailed or extorted or leaked. I'd simply preserved. Truth, after all, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive. The company began rebranding initiatives 3 weeks later. New logos, new leadership bios, a revised procurement policy with my old compliance workflow, now etched into official protocol. They'll never thank me. They shouldn't. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about gravity. I didn't flip the system with rage. I documented it to death. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Mandatory attendance. Virtual only. No breakout rooms. No Q&A. Just one link, one login, and a very clear warning in the invite. Please refrain from sidebar discussions until the session concludes. When that kind of language shows up in an all-hands, everyone knows something's gone sideways. Employees filed in from apartments, coffee shops, hybrid offices. Hundreds of faces blinking into the grid, their cameras flickering to life like pixels waking from a bad dream. A few whispered guesses in private chats. New acquisition? Layoffs? C-suite shuffle? But nobody said his name. Not directly. It was like they were afraid it might conjure him back. The CEO appeared first. No smile. No warm anecdotes about culture or resilience. Just straight into it. Today's update is operational in nature. We'll be reviewing org structure and upcoming leadership transitions. Behind him, a screen lit up with the familiar org chart. Departments branching like arteries. Color-coded boxes. Leadership tiers. The usual display of hierarchy dressed up in Helvetica. Then the screen stuttered. For a second, one name appeared at the top of a major branch. Ronald G. Redacted, VP Vendor Strategy. And just as quickly, it faded. No animation. No flourish. Just a hard cut, like someone had yanked the cord. In its place. Position under review pending investigation. Not filled. Not reassigned. Under review. The corporate equivalent of a chalk outline. No gasps. No reactions. Just silence. The camera panned slowly across the boardroom. No one spoke. Not the GC. Not Marla. Not the CFO. Even the usual Zoom chat warriors were still. It was a funeral without a body. A system pretending it hadn't just buried one of its architects. And still, not a single mention of my name. Good. This was never about me. It was about the pattern. The paper. The proof. They wanted me gone. Invisible. Erased. But I didn't disappear. I duplicated. I watched the meeting from my own screen. Camera off, volume low. Not gloating. Just witnessing. The system had turned on itself, one red box at a time. Ron thought he could delay the axe forever, as long as he kept laughing loud enough. He thought I was noise. A footnote. A temp with a sharp eye and no teeth. But I never needed to bite. I just needed to print. As the CEO clicked forward to the next slide, spinning some vague statement about renewed integrity, I leaned back, eyes dry, hands still. They threatened to fire me later. I fired the silence instead.